Hi, I'm DJ Ghetto Steve, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome if this is your first time here. We are going to be talking to another homeschool graduate, so welcome to the conversation. Hi, Whiskey and Guitars.
Hello, how are you?
I am good. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. Kids in bed at a decent time, so that's always nice.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I'm starting everything with what did your day in the life look like? So, you wake up in the morning, what does your school, chores, etc. day look like?
Oh wow. It really varied. We stuck pretty close to a normal public school schedule, except like I mentioned in my original post to you, we didn't get snow days. But we would start school around the same time. And so like from 8 to noon, if we did our school fast enough, is when we would do school. And then after that, we would do chores around our house. We were free to play, that kind of thing. At that time, my mom was super paranoid that we might have a neighbor or someone report us if they saw us outside playing too much. Um, to Child Protective Services or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because back at that, I'm from Western New York, and at that time, I don't know what it's like now. Homeschoolers they weren't necessarily viewed in the best light.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, we would get up in the morning, do school, and then it took us about a half day because we could kind of do it at our own pace. We had set lessons rather than lectures and things like that, obviously. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that's one of the nice things about it. It was kind of free. But yeah, we still did school, stuff like that. So,
Yeah, that was actually pretty similar for me. We had a basic wake up time of about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and you'd get breakfast, and then you'd sit down with your books and you'd read your chapters and answer your questions. And it definitely gave me a lot of flexibility when I was in like junior high and high school. I was
yeah.
able to run track and cross country with the public school, do theater, music lessons. Like, I had a job from the time I was 12. So, like, I did all the things and really took advantage of all that time I had extra through the day. Now, you said you used a Becca curriculum, right?
Yeah, we used Becca reading materials, a lot of their English reading books. Like, I don't know if you were familiar with, like, geez, I should have done some research before we met, but because I would have come up with specific examples, but we used a lot of their readers. We didn't necessarily use workbooks. Those were those pathway books that I told you
Yes.
about for English. But all the like the virtue story readers that they had, we would read out of those. So yeah, a lot of familiarity with Abeka, but nothing like strict all Abeka curriculum. It was pretty eclectic. For a while, we did. Man, I don't know if you remember, but back in the late '90s, and there was a Christian cable network called Sky Angel, late '90s and early 2000s, and it was they did my parents got this because they broadcasted or something Bob Jones University Press lessons and things like that. So we did that for a while. Yeah, pretty eclectic. My mom tried lots of different things.
Yeah, that's wild because I graduated 99, so definitely remembered the 90s, but I do not remember that channel. Um,
It's like a whole package or program.
Interesting.
I'm trying to think. I remember it was a big deal because the only time we would ever um, be able to use cable was when we went to our grandparents' house, and so it felt nice to have cable for a while. And like they would play family friendly programming like
Hmm.
old school westerns and cartoons, as well as the really poor production Christian movies and TV shows and things like that. So it was a cable network for Christians. So
Right. So
it
were you a
was.
bonanza or a gunsmoke?
We didn't get Gunsmoke on regular TV in our area. We didn't. I'm trying to think. So we only had Sky Angel for like a couple years, if that. and they would play Bonanza and Big Valley. So
Yes, Big Valley.
we did Bonanza a lot and Big Valley a lot. I'm trying to think. When we were older, we were allowed to watch Green Acres, but when we were younger, my mom was worried about the outfits that Ava Gabor wear. Or
Yes.
so, yeah, a lot of that older stuff.
Oh goodness. So since you guys were pretty eclectic, 'cause that's a pretty common theme that I see with a lot of homeschoolers. I think my parents were kind of a outlier in that like 90% of what we did was Bob Jones University. So I
Mhm.
feel for you having to watch those Bob Jones videos. They were a choice. Um
I
so
remember the one math teacher who had the big 80s hair that I don't know, like if this was your experience, but like for some reason in the fundamentalist church, like they're always like 2 decades behind.
mhm.
And even in the early 2000s, the women still wore the poofy 80s hair.
Oh yeah. Yeah, oh my gosh, the bangs to heaven. Did you ever get into like Answers in Genesis or
Yeah.
Kent Hovind?
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yep. We watched a lot of Kent Hovind lectures. He was very entertaining to me as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just like he could be really funny. So yeah, we watched a lot of Kent Hovind. We did not do like my mom focused on math, English, and some other stuff, but for history and science, it was mainly reading because she didn't have the capabilities of to teach us chemistry or biology. So a lot of
Right.
it was just get us biology textbooks and read to us. And I don't know. That's definitely one of the weaknesses of homeschooling. But for me, like I was just never really interested in pursuing science, so it didn't have any detrimental effect on my development. I still did
Mm-hmm.
fine in college. And if I had shown interest in science, she would have found some way to help me. But that just wasn't what I was interested in at the time.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I was a weirdo and I was obsessed with medicine
Hmm.
for a variety of factors. I was in a car accident when I was 12. I was actually hit by a car. And so I started the physical therapy and all that stuff really early. And so I was surrounded by hospitals all the time. And you get curious about it, and then I found medical thrillers, and
Oh,
suddenly there was this wide world of Ebola and bubonic
we're allowed to watch
plague,
those?
and
We're allowed to watch those?
they were books, so I was allowed to
Oh,
read them.
okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wasn't allowed to watch the movies, but I was allowed to read the books.
Okay.
I know it wasn't my parents' first choice for the kinds of books they wanted me to read, but they were like, it's at an adult level. It is fairly unobjectionable. There is minimal romance
Yeah.
in the books, so they were like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Now, were you part of a co-op or anything?
No, I was not. My wife was actually. But my mom, and maybe my perception is off, so take this sort of with a grain of salt, but I haven't seen anything to counter this perception. My mom was one of the, I'll scare quote it, pioneers of homeschoolers in our area because we grew up in a huge Mennonite community and they don't homeschool. They have their own schools. Like
Right.
we every in every region or area, there's schoolhouses, different schoolhouses. In fact, my mom did a one of our side hustles. We were pretty poor growing up. And one of the side hustles that they did was they got a 15 passenger van and would drive Mennonite and Amish people around and would get paid for that. And so my mom was their school bus. She would do a school run every morning and every afternoon, picking up and dropping off the young Mennonite kids. And
Interesting.
so there wasn't a lot of homeschoolers in our area. Um, so it started to explode, I guess I would say. And she was someone who people would come to. So we owned a consignment shop for a while. And a big part of that was we sold used books and a lot of used homeschool books. So people would come into the store to buy homeschool books and they would ask my mom for recommendations, like advice on how to approach certain things. And so I don't even know if there was a co-op in our area. We just did homeschooling,
Hmm.
you know. So,
Yeah, it was interesting because in our co-op, basically everybody's kids were a max of like 8 years old, and then there was me who was 16, my brother who was 12, and my sister who was 8. And my mom had been doing it, a good 8 to 10 years longer than any of these other moms, and so they all came to her for advice. What kind of curriculum? Do you have tips on how to set up lesson plans? And she ended up having to tape just a piece of paper with the giant word no on it. So she would actually start telling people no because she just kept overextending herself trying to help people.
okay. Yeah, well, my wife is here. She heard your question about co-op. My wife Leanna is here.
Yeah, welcome.
You.
So, yeah, she had a co-op experience, but she did a lot of school at home too, right?
Yeah, so we had co-op. We did co-op in high school. We had like a high school co-op where we went for, they offered a lot of classes, but we went for math, science, and Latin 2 days a week.
Very cool. How was learning Latin? I know a lot of families around us really liked the classical education style, but I don't know how successful they were at teaching Latin specifically.
Um, yeah, yeah, it was okay. It was my first introduction to a foreign language, so I found it really hard. And weird. Like just, English is very different
Oh, yeah.
than Native Romance languages with all like the conjugations and declensions and stuff. So I remember it being hard. We had like a young teacher. She was like, I guess recently I don't know if she was in college or I don't know. She was all seemed very young to me, but she had lots of Latin, I guess, growing up. But I took 2 years, but I didn't ever feel like I learned much. So I don't know if that was on me or if that was on her, but
Yeah.
maybe mix of both.
So, what kind of curriculum did you use?
We used mostly Abeka,
Hmm.
just like the workbooks and stuff, up until we went to the co-op, and then the co-op used an eclectic smattering of stuff. Like for math, they used Bob Jones, and we used Apologia for science,
Hmm.
and Latin. I don't remember if there was a specific. We had a book, but I don't remember what it was, like what curriculum it was.
Now, when it came to like extracurriculars, did you guys get to do like Awanas, 4-H, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, anything like that?
For me, it was very Uh, I personally think I had a very unique experience, but I haven't met a lot of homeschoolers. Um, I don't know. I haven't met a lot of homeschoolers, honestly. We went to house churches all growing up. There aren't a lot of very conservative churches in Western New York, at least not that we found. Um, and so we did a lot of house churches. So there was no Awanas, not very much community wise. You just kind of knew everybody. And if there were kids there your own age, awesome. If not, you just kind of dealt with it and hung out with the adults when you were allowed to and just listened. We were friends with a lot of Mennonites, and so I had the opportunity to do a lot of different types of trade work. I worked on
Nice.
farms a lot growing up. I did construction work. I did cabinet making, all kinds of stuff. And my mom would list those as like our physical education type stuff. So I didn't do a lot of extracurriculars. I didn't have a lot of friends, honestly. It was just kind of work, and I read a lot of books.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
that was
that
kind of
has
fun.
got to be the unifying thing of most homeschoolers is we had a rich library history.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I think that's really great. Like we can joke about and make fun of how ridiculous our parents could be when it came to like entertainment choices, but at the end of the day, like I honestly don't regret the fact that we weren't allowed to watch much TV,
Yeah.
and that we were just forced to read. And it's, we had my siblings and I would test extremely high in reading comprehension, like always 2 to 3 grades above the average, when it came to reading and reading comprehension and stuff like that, because we just read so much. So it was definitely something that I'm thankful for, and something that we're even trying to, in some ways, wrestle with our children. Like we don't want them to just grow up only ever watching TV. So
Yeah. And that's such a tough thing because screens are so ubiquitous anymore. Like in the 80s and the early 90s, it really was not that surprising if a family had maybe one TV and they might have cable, but usually the TV was just used for the blockbuster night once a week.
yeah,
Um, and now it's everywhere. My nieces have screen time, and it's all very curated and child friendly stuff. Like they have a Bluey app that they play in and stuff like that. So it tends to be enriching and educational to a certain extent. But yeah, it's so hard to otherwise capture the benefits that you get from obsessive reading.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So your extracurriculars, man?
Oh, I think.
Your brothers played sports. I know that.
Yeah. I mean, we did do Awana up through like sixth grade, and then we went to a youth group at our church, like every Wednesday night through high school. So I did that and had a lot of friends there. It was so my experience, it was different than Josh's than on that level because we went to a very large church. And so I had a lot of interactions with like kids my own age, and I felt like a good handful of friends throughout my growing up years. I didn't, aside from that, I didn't have a whole lot of, didn't play sports. My brothers did, but there was like a homeschool basketball league that my brothers were a part of all through high school. So I went to their games and stuff. I took art lessons. Like I had like mom paid for art lessons.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in rural Western New York, and my wife actually grew up and we still live right now in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Oh,
So
okay.
very evangelical center
Mm-hmm.
of the world. So she had like it's just a very different experience. Like I don't even know if there were enough homeschoolers in the 5 surrounding counties to have a basketball league of homeschoolers in my area. So it's definitely just interesting for us to
Yeah,
talk
and I think
about
it's
our
a different
different
north and
experiences.
south too.
That too.
Whenever like around here, there were so many homeschoolers. Like our youth group had probably, it was like the high school, it was all high school ages. So, but there was probably 200 kids in my youth group, and a third of those kids were homeschooled.
Yeah.
The other third went to private Christian school, and then the remaining third went to public school. So there was like 3 or 4 different co-ops in the area. It was just very, homeschooling was nothing like, even in the 90s, it wasn't weird. We would go up to Ohio to visit my grandparents, and it was like very rural. We would go to church and tell people, "Oh, we're homeschooled," and they just kind of look at you and like they would say, "What's that?" Like they had not heard of it. So yeah, definitely just different parts of the country, like just different experiences, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Um, there there was such a difference in what was available when we moved to Colorado versus what had been available in Iowa. Iowa was a miserable experience trying to homeschool there, and then we get to Colorado and there's basically no rules. You just kind of do your thing, and if you feel like it, you can let the local school district know. But yeah, it's so different regulation wise, and I think that plays a lot into exactly how many people decide to go down that path.
Yeah. Did you go to Colorado Springs when you went to Colorado? Or I don't know if you moved there with your parents or what, because I know Colorado Springs is like the Lynchburg of Colorado with James Dobson's ministry there.
So Springs has actually been home for me for about 20 years now. I didn't grow up here, but I've been an adult here since the early aughts, and it is really difficult to be a non-Christian, especially part of the LGBT community, non-Christian in the city of Focus on the Family. It has improved immensely over the last couple of decades, but it is really sad that it has taken a couple of decades to get us where we are.
Yeah, I had to imagine I had to imagine it's probably the same story in Lynchburg, like especially with Liberty here.
Mhm.
We like it's literally every fall and spring we get an influx of 20,000 extra people for Liberty, and yeah, it's definitely an interesting experience, especially like I said for me coming from just a rural area where there were
Mm-hmm.
very few fundamentalist types, unless you're talking Mennonites and Amish.
Right. How was dating for both of you? Were you allowed to date? Did you have rules about it? Were they on the I kiss dating goodbye train?
I didn't date much. This is one of the unfortunate things too, is because there was so little, I was just not a very well socialized person. Thankfully, when I came down here, and I did come down here for Liberty at the time, I met a group of really good friends who I guess helped me socialize. So I'm not as awkward now. But for me, a combination of awkwardness and a good portion of my adult life was actually spent. So I came down here for grad school. My undergrad was actually at two secular state universities, which I don't mean we could talk about that at some point if you want, but that was a really formative and awesome experience for me, because even though I still am a Christian, it helped me dispel a lot of the misinformation, I guess I would call it, that you get as homeschooling conservative fundamentalists in a very sheltered community, you know? So my first real exposure to the LGBT community was at this college. And it's like, oh, well, they're actually just really nice people who, they're just living life. This is not at all what and my parents were not, I guess for me, from my perspective, they weren't overly homophobic or anything like that, or how we didn't. It was just, you know, I don't know how to say it. Like it was it was just a sheltered existence. So that was a really great experience for me. But at the secular college, I didn't meet any people who I really clicked with because I was still a Christian. And even though I did make some good friends, dating wasn't really a thing for me, and I also was just awkward. So yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't think about it a ton.
Did your like mom say like, "Oh, you can't date until you're this old" or anything
Oh,
like that?
well, I was a guy, so of course rules are different, a lot different for guys than they are for girls in fundy communities. So yeah, I mean, my parents wouldn't want me dating at 15 or 16. The big advice from them was just to wait until they felt like, or until I felt like I was actually ready to take that on, which I thought was pretty good advice. Like it's not especially fundamentalist or Christian type. For my sisters, it was different. They, my parents wanted to screen anybody who wanted to date them. all that kind of stuff. But for me, it was more just like, you know, we taught, sex before marriage is wrong, that kind of stuff. But other than that, we didn't really get much of a talk as a guy. Yeah, I don't know. I know it was a lot different for my wife down here.
Yeah, I mean, my parents didn't want me dating in high school.
But you
Um,
did.
I didn't.
I thought you did. You had graduated from high school?
I graduated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, my first relationship was, well,
Yeah, you were in high school.
I was months away from graduating. I was 18 and yeah, my first relationship like started like the spring semester of my senior year basically. Um and but up until that point I hadn't dated and yeah, it was definitely kind of like you don't need to date in high school. My mom wanted like she's like if there's anybody who's interested in you, she wanted me to like hang out in groups.
Y'all had that too.
Yeah.
We were taught, yeah, that if you were interested, you hung out in groups.
She definitely liked the idea of courting.
Mm-hmm.
I did read I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
I didn't.
And my mom wasn't like gung ho necessarily all about it. She's like, I feel like this book leaves a lot of questions. She was kind of like, I don't feel like it answers a lot of questions I have. But she wasn't like against it. She felt like it had some good things to say.
Yeah.
And so my first relationship, actually, we called it courting, which felt very awkward. I kind of hated it, but hated that term. But it felt I was also very confused because we did dating like things like we would go out get ice cream. We would go on drives. I'm like, what would this look like? I wasn't real sure how it would look different if we were dating versus courting. So yeah.
No, if it tells you anything of the mindset of her parents, but especially her mom, up until we got married, her mom would always introduce me as just her friend.
Oh,
This is my yeah, this is my daughter's
Yeah,
friend.
we were like
Engaged.
Facebook official, boyfriend, girlfriend, then engaged, and she was like, yeah, this is when we were engaged, she said
Yeah,
that?
I think so. Like I just feel like I remember times where she would be like, "Yeah, this is my daughter." Maybe she said fiance. I don't know. I just remember sometimes she'd be like, "Yeah, we were Facebook official, everything, all of our family
I mean,
friends."
we were older. I was out of the house.
Yeah,
I was like
we were
mid
pretty
late
much
20s. Mom's introducing him as my friend.
So
and
I
they
don't
were roommates.
know. So anyway, that definitely interesting. But yeah, I didn't have any dating experience. My wife is the first girl that I ever dated.
As far as academically, have you, looking back at your education, kind of identified any specific holes that you ran into or ways that you might have felt underserved?
I mean, definitely in the sciences, but again,
Math.
yeah, math for me. I was going to get to that because that's a little more personal and frustrating. Science, like I find things scientific interesting. Like I always love nature documentaries and things like that, but it's not something where it's not something I'm crazy passionate about. Math definitely is something I struggle with, but not because my mom didn't try, because we fought her tooth and nail all the way. I'm not convinced that if I went to public or private school, I would have turned out differently because I was an idiot as a kid and it didn't automatically click with me. And so I got frustrated. So she made us do math, but we didn't apply ourselves. So if I could go back in time and kick myself, uh, and tell myself that I needed to pay more attention, then I would. But yeah, those are the two big areas for me. I did struggle a little bit with writing initially in college because we weren't made to write essays. I had a good enough knowledge of the English language from reading that after a couple visits to the writing center at the first college I went to, and then an understanding of what college writing should look like, I always got A's on my papers. So
Nice.
yeah, so it was definitely something that it was initially a bit of a shock, but I picked it up really quickly, and I've always been pretty decent at writing. So other than math and science, not really. Like I always did well in college and grad school. So
Um, yeah, for me, I feel like not that I can say. I mean, I was never very good at math, but I worked hard and I applied myself. And my mom, like, we've talked about this before, but like our like quitting or like just not doing our work was not an option. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ever think, oh, I won't do it because I don't want to. I didn't like doing math and specifically like the higher sciences, like chemistry. I remember hating chemistry and like algebra. I could, yeah, I didn't like algebra or geometry, but
Ugh,
uh,
algebra is disgusting. It
yeah.
just is.
But like we went to a co-op for those, so we had like a teacher and a class with like, 4 to 10 other kids, and I worked hard. My brother, who was like 2 years younger than me, was in my math and science classes, which I always thought was annoying, because he was younger than me, but he was doing the same grade work as me when just for those because he was really good at it. But he would help me like learn some of the concepts, and I got A's in those classes even though it was hard for me.
her two of her brothers are both engineers.
Yeah.
One works for Lockheed Martin, and then the other one, I don't know what company he works for, but he's a very successful software engineer. One went to Virginia Tech, and the other one did go to Liberty, but they're both very successful.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, so I think just I worked hard at those, and my mom was like always like even our at home stuff like testing. We had to do quizzes and tests, and we did have to write essays and research papers. And yeah, I think I had the pressure of our youth group, and like I was always afraid that, oh, what, maybe I don't know stuff that the kids at public school are learning, and so I was kind of self-conscious. I think looking back, I think I was like knew was either right on track or knew more than they did because like they didn't apply themselves. But at the time, I was just very self-conscious about learning at home and being afraid that I was stupid or didn't know what I needed to know. And so I think that kind of drove me to work hard and to get good grades.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we had, especially in the 80s, there were so many kids that were just so, I mean, kids are brutal to each other. But I remember so many kids making fun of me for being homeschooled, and I must be really dumb, and that's why I can't go to real school. And I developed a complex early about that. So I was this major overachiever because I was like, I have to prove I'm not an idiot like you said I am.
I never had that, and it's partially because I think I was so isolated. And also, my mom is very much an entrepreneurial type person. Like, she's always wanted to just be in the workforce, and that's what she trained us for. Like, so when we didn't get excited about certain school things, she in her mind, she's like, well, I want my kids to start their own businesses. Like, that's a big thing
Mm-hmm.
in the Mennonite community and in that area too. So when I wanted to go to college, she was kind of like, what? So for me, I never had that kind of competitive feeling necessarily. My brothers and sisters and I were all like separated in our grades. We weren't competing with each other. So yeah, it's definitely interesting that you guys felt that and I didn't. I never.
Well, I'm sure part of that is since I was homeschooler and missionary. We traveled to different churches literally every single week, sometimes two different churches in a week, and so I was just around a vast array of church kids, and sometimes the church kids are really nice, good little church kids like I was, and sometimes they were just every other little 8-year-old jerk. So
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I did definitely meet some mean church kids when we would visit
Oh,
different
really?
churches. Yeah, some Mennonite kids can be brutal. Mennonites are great people. We always, pretty much every single house that we lived in, and we moved probably 8 or 9 times as a kid. We always ended up with a Mennonite next door neighbor, and they're like the best next door neighbors you could ask for. For one thing, they're super handy, and so they would just always help us out. If we had something broken, one of our next door neighbors would always just come over and help us fix it, and we would pay them back by driving them places for free of charge. So, but all that to say, like they can be brutal. Some churches we went to, and we'd get made fun of because we were like the English kids.
Ah, yes. Now, have you guys put any thought to your own kids? Did you have any inclinations to possibly homeschool or incorporate some homeschool, or was it something that you definitely wanted to avoid?
I think we're gonna homeschool, at least for the first few years. We're both college educated, and when it comes to advanced math and things like that, her uncles are going to be more than willing to help. But I mean, we don't know for sure. We'll probably start out homeschooling, but I would like them to at least go to private school, Christian private school, maybe, as long as it's not like too fundamentalist. So I guess my biggest thing is I kind of just want, not that they can avoid this, and I'm not trying to be like an unnecessarily or overprotective parent, but just the bullying, honestly, is one of my biggest concerns. Just wanting them to avoid that for as much as possible and not have it be like something they experience from the time they're little up until high school. And maybe that's too idealistic or too hopeful, but that's honestly one of the biggest things for me, is just, I don't know, like I am not a helicopter parent. I don't want to be overprotective, but at the same time, while they're young and impressionable, I do want to protect them a little bit and have them hopefully have like a good footing and not necessarily.
Yeah.
No,
I
that
think
is super valid. I mean, bullying, I did not recognize the state that bullying had got to, but one of my ex-spouses, she had some nieces and nephews that were in like 6th through 9th grade, and the intensity, the just day in, day out, constant, and like the kids would track down their cell phone number or their email address, and like they just were nonstop with it, and I was like, holy cow, really?
rough.
Yeah.
Why?
Kids.
Yeah. It's just, well, I know for me, like I didn't, other than my siblings, I did not experience bullying. And one of the good things I think that it did is that it did make me, I don't know how to say this because I obviously don't want my kids to not have friends, but I'm very like, I just never struggled with peer pressure because I grew up in my home and my parents were telling me, you need to make decisions for yourself. You need to not worry about what other people think. And because I wasn't in an environment at a young age where there was a lot of peer pressure, I when I got older, peer pressure was just not something that really bothered me. It wasn't something that, and maybe it's a personality thing. I don't know. I'm not trying to like
I
take too
think
much
partly a
credit.
person.
Well, it might be a personality thing too. But as much as possible, I would just like my kids to have that. I want my kids to make their own decisions. We are going to teach them about Christianity and explain why mom and dad believe Christianity, even though we're not like fundamentalists or anything like that. But at the end of the day, we want them to make their own decisions. We're not trying to like protect them from the world, you know what I mean? Like in the fundamentalist sense, we're just simply wanting to protect them as much as we can from the bad things. And so when they hopefully get older, they develop mentally and have a healthy attitude towards people who are going to be mean to them and things like that.
Yeah, I think one thing, I mean, our kids are very young. We have a 2-year-old and, well, she's almost 3 and an almost 1-year-old. So like they're still young. We have some time to think about it. And our 2 almost 3-year-old is going to like
Yeah.
a little preschool,
Which has been great for
which has
her.
been really great. Like growing up, I always had this kind of like sense that, oh, we don't send your kids away to school. Let somebody else raise them. It was kind of like the message that I got, or
Yeah.
my
You're sinning if you send your kids to public or private school.
yeah. So that you don't want other kids raising. God gave these kids to you to raise. You're their parents. It was kind of this like message that I received. So I never would have thought I would send my little 2-year-old to preschool, even though it's only 2 days a week. Um, but just, I think, kind of just coming out of that a little bit, that
Mm.
mentality, and
And you did struggle with that a little
I
bit.
did. I mean,
You
I still
felt kind
feel
of
like I
guilty.
still feel a little bit of guilt sometimes, but I also know like this is what's good for our family. This is what's good. I know our daughter. I
She's very
know
extroverted.
she needs this. I know she thrives off of this, and this adds good structure to her week. And
Yeah.
so, like, even knowing her like that, like, I'm also thinking, okay, at 5 years old, like, she's very strong-willed. If she's the same way at 5 years old as she is now, she's gonna be fighting me tooth and nail to do school. Maybe,
Yeah,
maybe
maybe.
not. Maybe she'll love it. But like, I'm just like thinking, like,
Yeah.
for my own mental health, can I?
Well, and it's just also,
Can I do
it might
this?
just be maybe she does need a little bit of positive air, scare quotes peer pressure, hopefully, in the sense that she needs that competitive edge that you guys had. Whereas, like for me, like I think maybe one of the reasons why I didn't care as much about school was because I assumed I was going to go into a trade initially. I wanted to be a cabinet maker, and obviously you need to know basic math and things like that, but you don't need to
Sure.
know anything crazy. And then when I reached the age of 15, my mom got tired of fighting with us because she did fight with us a lot and we had to do school even if we didn't want to. But she was just like, fine, whatever. I don't have to report you anymore. You've completed eighth grade. Um, Go get a job. So I got a job making extremely poor money, working like 30, 40 hours a week, building solid surface countertops and some woodworking projects. And after about 8 months of that, it wasn't just the money. It was just, I was like, man, I don't want to do this my whole life.
Right.
And that's when I became interested in college and I got my GED and just went to college.
Did your parents ever disagree with something biblical or spiritual that was taught in any of your classes?
Hmm.
Trying to think. My dad was a Christian, is a Christian, but I credit him, and actually, honestly, I've called him and I've told him how thankful I am with that we didn't get pulled deeper into the fundy sphere because my mom, they're both first generation Christians, came from very, very bad backgrounds. My dad, especially, like in some ways, my siblings have some baggage from growing up because my dad wasn't super emotionally available, but he was there and he did care. He just struggled to show it. And he had an abusive father. His mom, he was one of 15 children in a non-Christian household. And so you can imagine like how that probably was handled.
A
There was,
dad who
yeah,
like didn't
his
wasn't he an alcoholic
his dad
and
was an alcoholic,
mean to
cheated
the
on his mom, would be physically abusive. So I have gone to counseling and I've worked through it. And honestly, I can say like he tried.
Mm-hmm.
He could have done things better in the sense that he should have gone to therapy and counseling and worked through that. But for someone who had such a horrible childhood, I think he did really good. And so anyway, um, I credit him with being the discerning one. And he wouldn't like my mom would be like, oh, let's go. There's this church here that has this conference going on. And he'd be like, that's weird. Why would we do that? That's not something that is biblical. Like one thing for a while, my mom and sisters would wear head coverings, but my dad just, I think, inherently recognized that the passage that talks about that in Scripture is speaking contextually.
Mm-hmm.
That there is something as Christian believers, we believe there is something to that that is applicable today, but it has to be something culturally relevant. And head coverings don't mean anything in our culture today. They're
Right.
not a sign of honor. They're not a sign of respect. They're just something that fundamentalists who insist on reading absolutely every passage of scripture literally think, oh, well, we must do this, even though there are some who are inconsistent about that and don't do head coverings. But my dad was kind of like, I don't know that we need to do this. But he'd let my mom and sisters do it because it was something my mom felt like she should do. And eventually she realized that she didn't need to. So there were things like that. This one house church we went to for a period of time got really big into, I don't know if you remember, like in the mid 2000s, or if you were still kind of involved in Christian culture at that time, if you remember the big deal about people who were claiming to have died and gone to hell or gone to heaven, like 90 minutes in hell.
Oh, Yes.
municipal
Now
stuff. Yeah,
I was out of the church at that point, but I remember seeing something on like Dateline or 2020 talking about these people that had angel experiences in near death experiences.
yeah. So my dad, like, we always acknowledge, like, we don't know, we can't say for sure what people's experiences are, but he was very skeptical of that too. Whereas so many people in our circle were buying into it, hook, line, and sinker, saying, "Oh, this is so amazing! This proves our faith." No, it doesn't. Not at all. And he was just very skeptical of it, even just on the grounds of scripture, like where in Hebrews it talks about how it is appointed unto man once to die and then judgment. And so, from a biblical perspective, it's not 100% certain that it makes sense. So things like that, where he would kind of present, like, provide this voice of reason where my mom could be a little, and she meant well,
Enthusiast.
enthusiastic. Yeah, she meant well, but she just wanted so badly to be a good Christian,
Yeah.
to be a faithful Christian, that she could sometimes rush into things. And my dad was always like, "Hold on a minute, you know, maybe we should think about this." So I guess I don't know if that answers your question, and not something specifically in homeschool materials that I can
Hmm.
think of, but just in general, kind of like we didn't go as fundy as we could have because my dad was kind of a voice of reason. So
I
within
mean,
the world of fundamentalism, the Lynchburg region area is not as fundamentalist as
yeah.
it gets.
Yeah.
So there's fundamentalism here, but even just listening to her experience, like, it wasn't as fundamentalist as the circles that I grew up in.
Yeah, like I had heard of like things like Bill Gothard
Oh
or
gosh, that
um
was something that we were involved in.
Vision Forum. Like I had heard those names, but we weren't like involved with them. We didn't watch or read their stuff. I think my parents would have disagreed with any of that kind of stuff.
I feel like your mom definitely dressed like Bill Gothard-esque style. Like, I see pictures of you guys from the 90s.
I think, yeah, I mean, I just think that's all 90s homeschool.
A
Oh,
lot of it is just the 90s. It's,
Yeah, I think most
oh,
of it 90s, like everybody kind of dressed like that.
yeah, maybe. I don't know. The jeans, the denim jumpers with
oh, they were so popular. So
sneakers,
popular.
the
Yeah.
white
Oh.
sneakers.
Oh, I refuse to wear tennis shoes with dresses. I saw that and I was like, no, no, no. I'm never doing that.
Do you have any specific advice for anyone who is homeschooling or a recent homeschool graduate and they're just kind of struggling with the transition?
Um, for me, it would be like, I don't know. I personally, it's weird because I'm a very critical slash cynical person, but at the same time, when it comes to ideas and even experiences, I really try to be fair,
Hmm.
um, on both sides, whether it's theology, politics. Like, I just want to try to understand where people are coming from, and I don't not judge them just like outright. Like, hearing differing opinions doesn't bother me
Yeah.
at all. I'm not. So I say that to say, when it can be real easy, I think, to feel inadequate as homeschoolers. Like, I have good friends who make fun of me for being homeschooler, so it doesn't hit as hard as, like, if it was being I was actually being bullied. But just like not looking down on yourself for it, allowing yourself to look at the positive aspects of that experience, because while there are definitely some negatives that can come about from it, there are a lot of positive things that can come from being homeschooled if you have, like, conscientious parents who are doing their best. Like, we talked about earlier, we had a lot of extra free time and we read a lot. And I still, like, I've read 3 times as many books as most of my friends who were public schooled in my lifetime, maybe even more. And it's like, I wouldn't trade that for anything. So yeah, just, I don't know, don't look down on yourself necessarily. Make sure that you can acknowledge any negatives that came about from your experience, but also say, well, there were a lot of positive things. And I think that in most cases, I know there is unfortunately, a lot of abuse that goes on in really conservative circles, and thankfully that's all coming out now. And I hope and pray that it continues to come out and is exposed for the disgusting, horrible stuff that it is. But I think that in a lot of cases, like, our parents are just trying. they're just trying to do what is best. They may be misguided, like my mom could be, and my dad too sometimes. But they're just trying to do their best, and so also make sure that you take that into account too, and maybe not necessarily be unnecessarily hard on our parents as well. Because I know some of my siblings can be, they feel a little insecure about it, and or maybe not insecure, they just think it was ridiculous, and they give my mom a hard time for it. And she tried really hard, and she did a good job overall.
Yeah.
I don't know if you said it in any of the other videos, but what would you say? Like, what would your advice be to?
So, I went over this in my BJU video. So, I have basically three things that I tell people. And one is to recognize that most likely, most of the educational choices that were made for you were done out of the best interests at heart with the information and the influences that your parents had at that time. And to give some grace and some perspective, but also be completely give yourself grace. You are allowed to feel however you need to feel.
Yeah.
Obviously, reach out to mental health professionals to help you feel through that and be able to deal with it in a healthy way. Um, but then after that is just taking responsibility for ourselves. And, yes, we can't change what happened when we were kids. We may agree and disagree with various things that happened when we were kids, but at this point, it is on to us to take classes to overcome any particular educational holes that you have that are preventing you from doing a good job at work or getting a better job that you want. Just really take that learning onto yourself and recognize that you got through all of those school years. You clearly know a little bit about studying on your own, so watch some Khan Academy classes to improve your note-taking skills, hop on Coursera and get some really well done certification work so that way you can get a better job. Like there's so many options out there at this point that while I think we need to acknowledge the emotional side of it and to honor our experience, it is very important for us to remain forward focused and to, just like our parents did, do the best with what we've got with the information and influences that we have available to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think that's great. I would agree with that.
Mhm.
I think
I feel
100%.
like that's what you did. Like
Yeah.
so Josh wanted to like just pursue more education but he needed his
GRE. Or
GRE.
not GRE. Well, I did take the GRE. I had to get a GED to get into college.
Yeah, so you did that. You did that. And
Mhm.
then more recently, he needed his GRE, but he didn't feel like he could do the math portion, so he studied really hard, like on his own and with help of my brother. And
Still didn't do great, but I tried. I did better than I would
I
have.
mean, you did good. Like for somebody who didn't have like the higher math, in
Yeah.
high school, like you did good. You learned it on your own, and you took responsibility for
Yeah.
that and did it.
Yeah. I think that as people who, I don't know, especially like, we're both a part of that subreddit, Fundy Snark, and I think sometimes I read things that there's a lot about fundamentalist culture that deserves to be criticized and called out for what it is. But I also just I try really hard to give my parents credit where credit is due, and like you said, not blame anyone necessarily for shortcomings. And I know we said it, but they did what they could, and so yeah, I just think that's really important for us is to just take responsibility for that and move on and just do what we can with what we have. And I think that sometimes people who are deconstructing, and like I'd say that both my wife and I have deconstructed to some degree because we have come, even though we still are Christian, we still have come out of, like, there's a lot of things that we disagree with from our upbringing. And so while we did end up landing maybe in not as extreme a place, we're all for the deconstruction process because it's really important for kids who grow up in a Christian home, and especially ones that can be kind of forceful, to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what they really believe. And so, but I think that people who deconstruct, especially if they don't land in a different, like less conservative form of Christianity, um, can be unnecessarily vitriolic. And so then it's like, well, yeah, it's unfortunate that our parents could maybe be misguided to that degree, but I think very few of us experienced, well, I don't want to say that. That's not for me to say. I think quite a few of us experienced parents who were, like you said, were just doing what they could and with what they had. And so I just think, I don't know, that's kind of I'm very passionate about this topic and something that I love to talk about. So sometimes I can kind of go off on tangents, so forgive me. But yeah, just like taking responsibility, but also not, yeah, not blaming our parents unnecessarily for things that they were just doing the best they could with what they had.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it is getting late, so I will let you folks get back to your evening. But I really appreciate you talking with me tonight.
Well, thank you for the invitation. If you
Yeah.
ever want to talk about something else, let us know.
Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. I'll keep you in my my saved list.